The past can be released in the present. So when we're doing our work, regardless of if the trauma happened last week or 25 years ago, or 30 years ago or 50 years ago, we can release things that have happened in the past and healing the actual trauma by changing the perception of the experience that we had often when we were children. So when you're a little kid, you are conditioned by the world. And the world tells you that if you don't behave a certain way, you could lose love. And this is pretty universal. Now, sometimes we have very wise parents, and they're capable of conditioning us in a different way because had already done their work to do their own undoing. But most of us had parents that hadn't done their personal work yet, that hadn't done their undoing. They were still showing us their trauma from their childhood. So when we look back at our experiences from our childhood, sometimes there's abuse. Sometimes it's not abuse. Sometimes we had this perfect doubting parent, and that perfect doubting, am I saying the word right? Doting. That's what I'm looking for. Perfect doting parent that would always do anything for us. That also in itself can be trauma because then that parent could pass, or that child can get to a place where that parent's not able to constantly be there anymore because they've moved out and they're trying to live on their own. And then when they find crisis, then they struggle. Or maybe it's a pattern of not communicating your feelings when you're angry or sad, like having to push them down because you didn't have your parents that were capable of communicating in a healthy way, or difficulty expressing emotion or affection, or over expressing or over giving or over gift giving, because that person was feeling a lack of self-love. So they were striving to earn your love. There's many different ways that we can be conditioned or we can experience trauma that affects us as we go forward. One specific trauma is physical violence or sexual violence. So when we have physical violence, so when someone physically assaults you, especially when you're a child, there is a power dynamic there where it creates an energy of feeling like I'm not safe if people don't like me. If I do something to upset somebody else, I'm not safe. And this actually fuels anxiety for positions of authority as you get older. This would create someone that would have nervous energy when seeing the doctor or talking to a police officer, talking to a judge. They'd have a hard time feeling equal to other people that they see in a position of power and would feel physical anxiety. Now, you can overcome this, and many people do. But if you do have anxiety with people in positions of authority, it may be because when you were a child, you didn't feel safe with those in authority above you. And sometimes this comes from physical violence. But and so I'll just go on and talk about the different types of trauma, and then we'll talk about how to heal it. Same thing goes with sexual trauma. So when somebody sexually violates you, or touches you, or treats you in a way where your body is not respected, this also can really hamper your ability to perceive yourself as lovable and that you're enough, and that you're valued for who you truly are and loved for who you truly are. Truly are. And often there's this fear of I'm not safe. I'm not safe. So similar to the physical violence, I'm not safe with people that I should be safe with. So it becomes a place where the world is not safe. And, this trauma can also live in us. Now, trauma, at the end of the day, it is perception. So just like things that are happening in your day to day now, as you're realizing that, you can change the way you perceive them, you can also change the way you perceive your past trauma and conditionings. So when you look at the parent that was overgiving, what was their trauma? Did they live in a place where, their parents never bought them anything or they didn't have enough? So just like when we have environmental changes, our trauma is similar too. So if we had a parent that had a lot of trauma, often they'll mirror that to us. So they'll show us their trauma and how they were treated, but actually to a lesser degree. So naturally, we all, without doing any therapy or any inner work, we all will abuse others. Got marker on my fingers. We'll abuse others less than we were abused, just naturally, because we knew it didn't feel good. But for us to completely change the way that we parent or treat others, um, different from the way we were parented, without doing any personal work, That's really difficult because then it identifies for us on a subconscious level that it'll make us feel like we weren't ever loved. So, for example, if your grandfather hit your mother, we'll say, and then your mother will hit you to a lesser degree than your grandfather hit her, but for her not to hit you would make her feel like her dad didn't love her. You got that? So, like, it's on a subconscious level. We play out our traumas and we mirror the way we were treated. So then when your mother hit you, that was actually her showing you what was not healed in her, how someone else had treated her, and what she thought what love looked like, right? And then, like I said, it'll be to a lesser degree because there was a part of her that knew it didn't feel good. So she won't model it exactly, but to actually change the whole behavior, there has to be um, a self-awareness that this is not how I want to be. I want to be different. Now, sometimes we reject the way our parents parented and we just say, that's so bad, that's so wrong. And instead of finding a middle ground, we will go the other way. That's where you'd find a really permissive parent that doesn't have any boundaries or will do whatever the child says or wants. And there's never any natural consequences, never any gentle correction or boundaries for the child because there was so much authoritarian or strong-willed parenting in their childhood. So we'll either model it or we'll go to the other extreme where we'll try to be the opposite. So we had a parent that was really neglectful, we'll be incredibly attentive. Or we had a parent that didn't give us anything that we wanted, like gifts wise. We didn't get our favorite doll at Christmas, then we will overgive to our children. Okay, so it can go either way. It will either mirror the trauma or our parents will do the opposite. But the difference between a healed perspective and these two perspectives is they actually haven't done the work. Still a trauma response. So even when they're rejecting the parenting style of their parent, the way that they'll do in the opposite direction will be too far. It'll be too permissive. There'll be no boundaries. So often it's a mirror, especially traditionally, especially with physical violence, that was often mirrored. And now people are going the other way. So I was had physical violence, and then I'm going to never discipline my child or give them any boundaries and allow them to do whatever they want because I know it didn't feel good when my mom hit me or my dad hit me, right? So the way through that is to heal. Okay, so we have to heal the trauma to not replace it. I do need to mention about sexual abuse as well too. One thing I've learned, and I feel is a core belief that I hold as a therapist, is that people don't sexually abuse unless they've been sexually abused. They have some sexual trauma that allowed them to think that that was an appropriate means. It's not that they think that it was okay, but for example, if, an uncle sexually molested his nephew, for that nephew to not sexually molest somebody else, he'd either need to do therapy, or like work through it or pray through it or do something to say that I don't want to be like that. But there's a potential there that he'll play out what happened to him in order for him to feel loved. So by him molesting his nephew or niece or whatever, that would create this subconscious thought, okay, well then if I can molest this child that I think is lovable, that means so that when my uncle molested me, I was actually lovable. It's really twisted. Of course, it's not okay, but this is how people experience their trauma. So when we start seeing that the person that violated us, whether sexually or physically, or abused us in some way, they were actually modeling what was done to them to a lesser degree often. They're modeling what was done to them and their trauma and how they felt. So the powerlessness that they felt, they're showing us that. The pain and the trauma they felt, they're showing us that. It's always a call for love, and it was never about us. So when you can see that, if you had a parent that was physically abusive or a parent that sexually assaulted or an aunt, uncle, cousin, neighbor, that was never about you. It was never about you not being enough. It wasn't about you not being lovable. It was actually reflective of what was not healed in them. It was their call for love. Any behavior that is less than loving, anything that was, yelling at you, putting you down, being overly critical. You have to, you ought to, you should. I'm so disappointed in you. You're such a failure. You're never going to make it. All of that, they're projecting their own trauma. The other pieces that we get from our parents, and we often model in our parenting style, is this idea that I need my kid to be perfect for me to be enough. So if you are struggling, that's an indicator I'm a bad parent, right? So our parents would feel like, I'm not enough if my kid's struggling, so I'm going to attack, criticize, put my kid down to make them better so that I can feel like I'm enough. That's again coming from a hurt place. We are not responsible for our children's actions. They are. And your parents are not responsible for your actions. You are. But it goes back and back and back. So your great grandfather, disciplined your grandfather and said, I'm so disappointed in you, and put him down because he felt like he was a failure as a grandfather, and then great grandfather, and then so going down. I think you're getting my idea. So it's always repeating that trauma, but just to a slightly lesser degree. So the way out is forgiveness. Just like current trauma, forgiveness is the key to happiness by releasing these grievances, seeing the innocence in the people that in the things that they did when we were children. This is what releases. Now, let me be very clear. We are not saying it's ever okay to abuse somebody sexually, physically. Anything that's less than loving is not okay. Even yelling at your kids, it's not okay, but it was their best. And when you get to that place where you can see that that was their best based on their education, their social conditioning, their own trauma, okay, their societal norms at the time, that when if you see it that way, if you had the exact same conditioning as them, the exact same trauma, you were sexually or physically abused in the exact same way, you had the same environmental situations that happened, the same conditioning, you would have behaved the exact same way as they did. And when you can conceive of that, that's how you can release them without saying that what they did was all right, but you can release them and no longer have attack thoughts towards them. And this will also release you as well, too, if you are a parent, from being hard on yourself for what was your best in the past, and then giving yourself gentle correction for the future. So the past is released in the present through forgiveness. So being able to see things in the past, how can I see this differently? So when you had a parent that, maybe they really valued their body, or they really valued what other people thought of them, and they felt like they need to have this and this and this money and this status and these looks in order for them to be lovable. So they'll behave in a certain way, and they might put pressure on you on how you dress, how you look, maybe even your weight. That was about what was not healed in them, though. That was about them saying, I'm not lovable unless my child is successful, and not these things that I'm most afraid of. So seeing it as that was actually their trauma. This was a call for love. Sometimes parents discipline they're trying to express love in a twisted way, and it's more like a call for love. But sometimes their heart is really coming from a place of, I'm trying to love my kid, and this is what I know love to be. Okay. And this idea that people can hurt me. So your childhood trauma, that anyone can hurt you. So whether now or in the past, being hurt by someone is perception. Now, when you were a kid, you didn't have the capacity to say, oh my gosh, that person's really hurting and doesn't know what to do. This isn't about me. But you do now. So now you can be able to shift it from they hurt me to they were hurting. It's not they hurt you. They were hurting. It had nothing to do with you. Okay. And knowing that you can always choose peace instead. So by releasing the past, we release ourselves. This will stop you from attacking yourself for doing your best, whatever it is, in any moment. This will also help you to remind yourself what you're responsible for, telling the truth, treating others the way you want to be treated. And then the bigger stuff, the trauma where there was a death in your family, you lost a parent, sibling, injury, you had a disabled sibling, someone lost a limb, or significant loss, your house burned down. Being able to trust that there's a bigger plan. And this is, your spiritual component, surrendering that there's purpose and meaning to life and suffering and death. But death is an illusion. The body is not what you are. And loss, all things are impermanent. and not to value the valueless. So really, loss of material things is value. You valued the valueless, and then there's suffering that's created from that. So then the shift there would be, I will not value the valueless, and the only thing that's really valuable is things that are permanent, and that's your ability to choose peace in every moment, your capacity for love, your capacity for change, your capacity for connection, and that exists whether you're not in a body or not. All right, so that's the lesson. Our past can be released in the present. So regardless of what your trauma is, you can work through it. You can heal it. And it's by healing the way that you thought about it in the past to the healed mind thoughts that allow you to see the innocence in yourself and others and know that it was never about you. Okay, peace.